Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. Welcoming to the show, Nikil Saval, who is running in the primary election for the first Senate district, I believe is the one, for the Pennsylvania State Senate, who has also been an editor of N+1 magazine and, writer, sort of journalist type fellow on the left for a number of years. And welcome to the show, Nikil.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah,
and just to kick things off, I thought you could, what's interesting to me as a fellow writer is how you got the notion in your head of running for office. It's something I've kind of, sort of half considered now and then, but I imagine it really takes a tremendous amount of effort to really make it happen.
It does. I feel like actually the deciding is you decide and then you start to do the things, but actually the campaigning is grueling. But for me it was actually, it may seem, depending on what sort of side of my life you kind of you may know me from, if insofar as anyone knows, as people know me, it's maybe less surprising than it might seem. So I've been a writer, I'd say full time since about 2012. I've been a full time freelance writer. I was a graduate student. I worked in book publishing. I always wrote on the side, but I've done that since 2012. And actually since about that same amount of time, actually a little before that, I've done labor and community organizing. So when I was in graduate school in 2009 in California, I began to volunteer with Unite Here, the Union of Hospitality Workers. So they represent, in San Francisco where I was, they represented almost exclusively hotel workers as well as workers at the airport. And then in Philly, when I moved here in 2011, I got involved with the locals here, and they represented cafeteria workers in the school district, hotel workers, stadium workers, workers at the airport. So it was service workers, and just worth noting that most of them have been laid off. They're one of the hardest hit unions by the COVID crisis. So I've been involved in organizing for a while. And then in 2016, I was a lead volunteer in the Sanders campaign in South Philly, launched canvases for my house for Sanders and for the South Philly part of the campaign. And then out of that, co-founded a progressive organization called Reclaim Philadelphia, which was meant to continue this work that we had been doing, the canvassing, bring together all the volunteers and create an infrastructure and an institution that would outlast any particular campaign. And so then I helped elect Larry Krasner to district attorney here, to Elizabeth Fiedler to see representative in South Philly, Kendra Brooks, the first Working Families Party candidate in city council in Philly, or first independent candidate in modern Philadelphia history. And then I kind of channeled that energy into community organizing and party work, and ran a bunch of people for local Democratic Party office. I was elected ward leader in South Philly, which is like a party boss, essentially, of sorts. That's what you would refer it. It's a
nice,
cog in the machine. And
do you hand out turkeys and baskets of whiskey and presents at Christmas time?
So I can't. In fact, I have to answer with an unjoking yes. Actually, I do. I do. In fact,
oh, that's great. I was going to say you should start doing that.
Not whiskey. We do. We have had that I should be doing. But yes, actually, we do Thanksgiving drives and Christmas drives and toys. And I was Santa Claus.
Do you hand out N+1 subscriptions along with the turkeys? Because that would be a cool innovation.
Just like, yeah, the nonprofit rules are really strict, unfortunately. But no, yeah. So so I did that, and so basically I've been involved in organizing in politics for the entire time, and in a way I'm not, except for, N+1 has a lot of political writing, but my own writing is not always directly organizing related, or even related to national or local politics. It's kind of oblique to that. So I feel like I've kind of kept two sets of books, if that makes sense, and they've informed each other. But so when I decided to run, we had an infrastructure in place, and I knew I could count on that. And it wasn't that I decided. It was in some sense it was posed to me as a question, and I wasn't horrified by the idea. And here we are. So,
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. It seems like there's, writing is a pretty solitary activity, but yeah, it's not surprising to me that you would have some sort of side projects or alternative stuff going on that would sort of pave the way, mentally and logistically to make that happen. But can you tell us, I am a recent interloper into Philadelphia residency, not a true patriotic city of love cheesesteak eater. And so I'm not terribly familiar with the district boundaries. So can you tell us, approximately where is the first district and what sort of folks live there?
So the first district is really the central district in Philadelphia, both geographically and in sort of commercial and political terms. It has long been one of the most influential, and I'll try to describe it for those who don't know Philly. Basically, it contains the downtown center city, and it runs south along the eastern side of the city, all along the Delaware. So it's South Philly, what is normally considered South Philly. Runs up through Society Hill, so all of all the kind of federal era or colonial era monuments, Independence Hall, things like that. All of that is in the district. It goes up along the river into Fishtown, Kensington, what are called the River Wards. It has Fairmount, so where the art museum is. It has Chinatown. It has Graduate Hospital, so it runs river to river, Schuylkill to the Delaware. And then it runs in a strange way along Passyunk Avenue, which is one of the few kind of diagonal streets in Philly, all the way southwest, cross the Schuylkill River to the airport. So it contains all the sports arenas, the airport, the art museum. It's just and then the city hall, all the kind of major office buildings in the city, the two Comcast towers, which last we have two. And so it is that's the district. And the kind of important thing to note about it, besides its being geographically, commercially, and politically the heart of the city, is and it's hard to kind of describe, but it's without seeing it. But once you see it, it's very clear. It's gerrymandered it's racially gerrymandered. So it's always been a safe Democratic seat for modern Philadelphia history. So it's not gerrymandered for partisan reasons. It's gerrymandered to be whiter than it would otherwise be. So it cuts out Point Breeze, which is one of the largest black neighborhoods in the city. It cuts out parts of Kensington that are Puerto Rican, black, and actually Palestinian. So it is about 60% white. It was actually whiter than that. For a time, it's grown less white, it's grown more diverse because of immigrants moving into Philadelphia, which is also the source of the city's recent growth. I mean, the city was declining in population for many years. It's now been growing. And so it has grown more diverse, but ultimately the district is whiter than it would in a more kind of rational or normal district line plotting it would be.
Right, yeah. And how many senators are there? I know there are a crap load of representatives. We had a Dempsey on who's running for the 175th, and that's I think that's coterminous with part of your district, but maybe a quarter of it. So what's the number of senators?
It's 50. So it's not as enormous as the House, and yes, the 175th is nested more or less nested within the Senate district.
Right. So actually, it seems like you're in a fairly similar position to that fellow, who he's running as a lefty in a wider and richer part of the city, and trying to sort of mobilize what maybe would be called sort of professional managerial class people, a lot of them, though I'm sure there's plenty of poor people in the first district. But like normally, I mean, I would presume that it was gerrymandered in that way to keep out, as many, black people and poor people as possible, just have a sort of like a base of support for, the kind of like city bourgeoisie and the, upper middle class. What is your perception of the sort of state of play there? Like who are you trying to make inroads into, the maybe somewhat disillusioned or proletarianized professionals, or like bring in the poor people that still do remain, or like all of those things?
Yeah, I mean that gets at the complications of the coalition that we are trying to build. So prior to about 10 or 15 years ago, actually, this district was fairly evenly split, and this speaks to the kind of political or class fractions as well as which are tied in with the racial gerrymandering. So it was professionals in Center City, and then who were then considered fairly liberal, right? Let's say 10 or 15 years ago, they would be the liberals in that terminology. And then there would be South Philadelphia, which was largely Italian American, Irish American, kind of in the kind of social, it was relatively more conservative, although not in all respects. It just was, there was sections, there was a lot of organized labor, the building trades have a presence in the district. And so it's, roughly speaking, there was like a liberal quotient in Center City and a conservative, a more conservative or traditional quotient in South Philly. And again, these are crude categories that are but they're useful for explaining. And so Vincent Fumo, the senator for 30 years in this district before he was indicted on like 139 counts of bribery and corruption, was the I
love Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's fantastic. He a very significant figure in many ways, and described it actually that he was unbeatable because he had bases in both sections. So he had a liberal support in Center City and he had conservative support in South Philly. And if anyone challenged him from the left in Center City, he could appeal to his more conservative base, and then vice versa. If someone challenged him from the right, he would kind of rely on his more liberal base in Center City. And so he
was triangulating. You might say.
Indeed. Yep. It's the triangle. And so he considered himself unbeatable. The thing that has changed is that, over several cycles of organizing and just, political change in South Philly in particular, the district the South Philly portion of the district has become more, now in the current terminology, progressive than Center City. And so actually the overall cast of the district has changed. And so that's where I come in. I come from South Philly and from that tradition of organizing. This is where Elizabeth Fiedler, who was backed by Reclaim and DSA and South Philly, won. And so we that's the kind of thing that's the base, as it were. And so but then we do have to, you are also winning over a coalition of people who are left out of, or deliberately, or through benign neglect, as someone might, as of the like boom in Center City. And then you have people who are younger or just otherwise disaffected with the machine in Center City. And so the machine has essentially controlled the district for 3 state Senate seats, including the incumbent. And so you're also running not just on a set of progressive values or like a set of ideas or ideals, but you're running on a set of, you're running an anti-corruption campaign, which I am. I feel like we're running against a district that has been historically corrupt, and that's the kind of case to make.
And the incumbent looks like another corrupt politician. Surprise, surprise. In fact, right? and it seems that you have. It's a nice way to turn out a lot of disillusioned, disaffected voters, especially young voters, for that very reason, right? Because you're offering a platform that is truly leftist and truly liberatory and emancipatory, and it's precisely that kind of energy, it seems to me, that would activate a lot of new voters who would finally see an opportunity to really put somebody in who's quite different from the machine and what they have to offer, right?
Thank you. Yeah, that is the pitch, as it were, that you want someone in this district, and you have to also recast the district as the district. It should have a leading state senator, and then that the notion of what that leadership is encompassing of both of the platform of a Green New Deal for the state, of a homes guarantee, of universal family care and things like that, and also of integrity and activity and just and genuine constituent service and community organizing. And I think that will also encompass every part of the district and be inclusive. I think insofar as if you feel included and happy with the district and how it's going to be hard to dislodge you from. I mean, but even then, a lot of people just think, yeah, but we need, they may be satisfied, but they're clearly freaked out by climate change, and then who is the person who offers the clearer vision on how to fight that? Who is the person who's going to be leading that when Democrats retake the legislature, or that's also part of it. So, I think that is the coalition that we're trying to build. And it is, again, like, it also is more diverse. Like, it is like a coalition that the district is about 20% Black. It has it has a number of immigrants from Southeast Asia, from South Asia, from Latin America. That is also the district. That is also part of the coalition, because I think all of these groups, all of these constituencies are not part of what's going on in the kind of like recent development boom in Philadelphia. In fact, they're often not only excluded from it, but just hurt by it. Like, it is the source of the gentrification. It is the source of a lot of what's causing displacement in this district.
Who is the incumbent? Alexi referenced something there I'm not familiar with, but what's the story there?
So the incumbent is Larry Farnese, who has been there since 2008. He was elected in 2008. He is a Center City lawyer. He a corporate attorney. He actually maintains he maintains his practice. He's of counsel in a law firm in Center City while also being a state senator. So he has two jobs, effectively. And he ran in 2008 in a very competitive primary against John Doherty, who is the head of who has the Electrical Workers Union, IBEW 98. And then another candidate, Ann Dicker, who actually at that point was like the progressive in terms of good government, sort of more left-leaning candidate. And then he won in that primary. He was backed by the outgoing Senator Vincent Fumo, who was going to run for re-election, was indicted spectacularly, dropped out, backed Farnese. He won. He's never had a challenger since. And I would say that early on he was an active state senator. He introduced some interesting legislation, but then since has kind of has not really emerged as a leading senator, and has basically done a lot to cast himself as sort of the developer candidate. I mean, he's backed overwhelmingly by real estate developers. He received several contributions last week just from the landlord lobby, which is, which is not, I would say, my favorite.
Everyone loves landlords.
Yeah, exactly. It's just sort of like but multiple contributions from big commercial landlords and the head of the landlord lobby. So that's a lot of his constituency. He does drive a lot of development dollars to the district, state money, state grant money. And then in the last 4 years, actually, he used his own campaign funds to pay. So he's also a ward leader. He used campaign funds to pay for one of his Democratic committee people's daughters to study abroad. He used $6,000 to just pay for a scholarship fund for his committee person's daughter. and he was indicted by the Justice Department for this, and that was for for essentially buying votes. That was what the charge was. He was acquitted of that because he defended himself. This act as constituent service, and in fact, I mean, insofar as they couldn't prove that it was a vote buying scheme, it's an effective defense. You can actually use campaign funds in Pennsylvania for virtually anything. There was a study in the Inquirer, or like a piece in the Inquirer, Philadelphia Inquirer, a few years ago. No, last year actually. That pointed out that elected officials were using campaign funds to study viticulture in France, and they would use their campaign money for this, and it's legal. There's just no limits on this. So the indictment, this is the first time he's running since that indictment. He was acquitted, but I don't think I have to make much of a case to say that it's not an especially sterling example of leadership in this district.
Wait, Nikil, are you saying that his constituents didn't elect him to make daughters of rich donors more erudite and culturally savvy? Because I'm pretty sure maybe he ran on that. I don't know.
It's a question. I feel that it's just not a, yes, obviously it's not a strong play there, but it's funny because it has been, I think this is another characteristic of the racial gerrymandering of this district and what the expectations are of white politicians versus politicians of color. I'd say that if you were a black politician and had done this, or if you were me, if I had done this, you would not be considered a candidate for political office again. Like, I just think it's one of these things that the expectations are lower on politicians, on corporate attorneys of a certain class, basically. So
now, say what you will about the importance of study abroad. I think it's wonderful. Somehow I feel like, I'm just saying, it's a lovely thing in college. Your homes guarantee seems perhaps more important for the people that you're hoping to serve. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I noticed there's a lot of great issues that you address. And Ryan wrote a paper on social housing that is very interesting too. I just think it's an under-discussed policy issue that really, really could help a lot of people. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I will just say that paper on social housing was hugely life-changing for me, actually. I remember reading that. It's the paper with Peter Gowan, I think, and
yep.
And Peter was one of the first people I reached out to when I started to think about housing policy, and then some of those homes guarantee. So there is a national homes guarantee platform that incorporates some of that research into social housing and thinking about social housing as opposed to the American model of public housing that you and Ryan and Peter outline. And so the homes guarantee proposal in brief is essentially, it's geared to, it takes a lot of the elements from the national homes guarantee, but is geared towards Pennsylvania and Philly. In the sense that, there are kind of three large tasks, I would say. I mean, one is expanding the stock of building more affordable housing, I would say, and then protecting renters, and then third is more about land use designations and expanding the ability to establish community land trusts and things like that. And then there's a kind of set of other proposals that help existing homeowners and like with repairs and things which I think would be hugely transformative, but they're in some sense they may seem smaller than those other plans. And so Philly is distinct from New York, let's say, or I don't know, in other places where the perception, San Francisco, where the perception is that there actually is not enough housing being built, or that there's simply it's a supply side issue. With whether you believe that or not is not the case in Philly, in the sense that there is actually a lot of just housing. There's a lot of housing stock. Some of it is in very poor shape, and a lot of it is sort of affordable to if you have a working class salary, more than most places. But if you're under that income level, it's virtually impossible to get good housing. The stock of public housing, affordable housing, is shrinking every year. There's a lot. It's just very difficult to keep up housing if you have it. The rent burdens are extremely high, and so we try to build, we call it build, preserving, or converting. We've estimated 1 million units of housing, and that you get there basically by preserving the housing that is affordable, that exists. And that's, this follows the model of a Green New Deal for housing, because it's also preserving and retrofitting and decarbonizing that housing. We also believe we should just be building more affordable housing, which you can do through state grant money, through LIHTC, any number of funding streams. The Pennsylvania Housing Finance Authority is actually quietly building some units of passive affordable housing. And then finally, just converting existing housing stock that is unused. There's just a lot of vacant land, empty houses. There are 25,000 vacant homes in Philadelphia. And so our proposal is to convert these, to have the city take hold of these houses and convert them into livable housing. So that would be 25,000 houses. We estimate that could be housing for about 125,000 people. So that's the kind of, that's the build, the actual housing supply component part of it. And then the other side is the renter protections part, which is that we believe we should have a system of rent stabilization or control, or whatever you want to call it, across the state, a right to counsel in the case of eviction, and a just cause for any sort of eviction proceeding. And so before launching any eviction proceeding, to protect renters, it's 50% of Philly, over 50% of Philadelphia residents are renters, about a third of Pennsylvania households. So that would be dramatic if we were able to achieve that. And we think the state is the place to do that. We've seen other states move on issues like this. And that's why, that's one of the principal reasons I'm running for state senate, is to advance a policy like that.
Yeah. Just on my street, I noticed there are 2 vacant homes. One of them has been completely gutted and then was stopped because I think the construction people didn't get the right permits, and the other one is just boarded up. And it strikes me as kind of crazy to just let these perfectly good row houses just sit empty, because nobody's willing to, take them up. But this, I want to talk some more about your some other policies, but it occurs to me before that, were you to be elected, it would be pretty difficult to sneak this sort of a policy by, even the Democrats in the Pennsylvania Senate and House, and they don't control either chamber. If I'm correct about that, though we do have a Democratic governor now. What's your perception of the sort of state of play with regards to sort of partisan politics on the state level? What do you think the chances are of the Democrats being able to take the legislature? And if so, what's your sort of game plan to be able to try to move some of these policies or something like them through the caucus?
So you're quite right. The Democrats are in the minority in both chambers, and they're a beleaguered minority in the sense that there is a revanchist, red in tooth and claw sort of Republican Party on the other side. I mean, that's true across the country at this point, but it's just worth noting that it is just the kind of, I think the Republican legislature recently was trying to ensure that telemedicine, sneaking anti-abortion legislation into telemedicine bills. There's just to screw anyone during this crisis. It's just incredible what they'll try to do. But so it is difficult. Like, you're not going to, the point is that these plans are not necessarily going to be advanced in the current legislature. It is conceivable that the Democrats retake the legislature, not necessarily both houses this year or in the next, but I think in 2-4 years, there's about 4 seats in the Senate. And I believe I'm going to get this number slightly wrong, but I think it's 9 actually that need to be flipped in the House. And so that's not nothing. It's very difficult to flip seats, but it is possible. I think people have the Senate is not, I don't know that the Senate, for example, is focused on my primary because it's a safe seat. They're focused on flipping seats. And so my idea is that when you retake the legislature, you need leadership in the state Senate and you need a program. And this is part of that program, is advancing a green homes guarantee. And so it's already started to happen in the state of this primary in the way that things do, which is that the Senate leadership introduced major housing legislation, which does it does try to expand funding for affordable housing and things like that. Principally, so I think the incumbent state senator could co-sponsor it and be a housing person, and things like that. So there's renewable energy legislation that was advanced, and again, the incumbent state senator signed on and called himself a Green New Dealer, and things like that. So there's that is starting to happen just due to the primary challenge. And so as we've seen in other bodies, seeing where a particular kind of political figure gets in backed by social movements and with some attention paid to the race, it can actually start to change the conversation within the chamber. But really practically, there's actually a lot of leeway in the way that state government works in Pennsylvania, where you can direct a lot of state grant money. So Pennsylvania just has the state grant program. It's not loans. It's not tax credits, although they have those too. It's just for development projects called the Redevelopment Capitalization Assistance Program. And in this district, which I'm running for, it attracts those development dollars like nothing else, because it contains Center City and it contains the downtown. So actually a lot of money has gone into that district, and the state senator has leeway in advocating for or blocking some of those projects. Mostly that's gone to commercial real estate and luxury hotel development. The W Hotel in Center City got about $25 million in a single grant. The second Comcast tower got about $25 million, also in a single grant. These are like essentially no strings attached grants. I mean, they have some sort of numbers attached to them about job creation and things like that, but they're not, there's a lot of opacity in how they're handed out. But essentially, that's the state senator can help in that process and do a lot. And that's so Senator Farnese will, for example, say, I've brought $1 billion to this district. And he's not totally wrong. Like, he did have a huge hand in saying that, like, in doing that. And so similarly, you can, if you're a state senator, you can say, well, where are those dollars going, and what are the real priorities and needs of the district? Should it be the case that Comcast gets a RACP grant of or RCAP grant of $25 million when we have schools closing across the region for lead and asbestos, or that people are raising money to fix their local playground? I mean, like, why is that the case? And only $14 million, going back to the housing question, only $14 million has gone over 12 years to affordable housing. So it's about 1,500 units. It's just not very much. And so having an advocate for housing in that seat would be a big deal, I think. And it would help change the priorities in the district, because it's not just it's these things are getting built at the expense of those other things. We have to think about the shape of the Philadelphia skyline as reflecting the priorities of this state senator and who he is close to and who he fraternizes with. It's not coincidental, I think, that a lot of the people who get these grants are also major contributors to the senator's campaign. And so it resembles kind of pay to play sort of models in that everyone is familiar with, I think. And
Are you saying is there a correlation between the skyline and the number of study abroad daughters that go abroad? Do you think is it like a 1-to-1? Would you say?
That's exactly right. Yes, that's what I'm proposing.
One Comcast tower, one study abroad program. I mean, that's just responsible government right there.
Can you give us even more concrete examples of, so let's say you have the position, congratulations, you did it. What would it look like in the room, with you in the room, in terms of like, we don't need to pass legislation. We don't need actually to have a bipartisan consensus. You are able to just shift the allocation of certain funds from the grants. Could you just give us even more detail about like what that would look like? What might be, instead of a new Comcast tower, or instead of like the W Hotel getting a huge subsidy, what would that look like if you were there?
Well, so, for example, I think I mentioned this briefly, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Authority, which is just the state housing arm, has actually been channeling funds to build no carbon or, passive affordable housing in South Philly. I think they built about 44 units of this. And it's just one of these things that is not spoken about. It seems to be a kind of experimental program. I myself have not talked to anyone there about it, but it's just one of these things that is, I would try to drive in. So so a lot of these grants are hashed out in budget season. Like you can kind of write letters to the governor. You write like essentially the way it technically works is the governor gives a thumbs up or thumbs down to certain projects. But between the project applying for the grant and the governor giving the thumbs up or thumbs down is the state senator at some point. And so the state senator, being an advocate, is hugely influential on whether in budget season Philadelphia gets its grant money and where that grant money goes. And so I would help channel it to housing in particular. I would help channel it. There's ways that schools in particular, which if Philadelphia has a major issue, and this is not unique to Philadelphia, but has a major issue with lead and asbestos remediation in its schools. And you can get, technically the way the program works is the grant money can go to friends of groups or nonprofit arms attached to the schools, which are not always the best things in terms of school funding, but they could do lead and asbestos remediation. They could keep children in the schools safe from getting sick, teachers. But then also, I mean, we've proposed a Green New Deal for our schools because we believe that schools infrastructure is also important to be preserved. It needs to be more than remediated. It needs to be resilient, and it needs to be, to mitigate against the effects of climate change. We need new heating and cooling systems in them. They can be anchor institutions for a neighborhood. So that there's more to be done that I think is creative with our school buildings as well. So like those are the kinds of things that you could drive money to. Recreation centers, things that are just public institutions. That's what I start to see as the possibility here.
It strikes me that there's some consonance between the viewing this pot of grant money as just trying to like give it to your campaign contributors and trying to give it to your dole it out to like the constituency as a whole, like the people who need it most in the district, but who are also voters and presumably would have some appreciation for a nice benefit and a new playground or getting the lead and asbestos out of schools and stuff like that. Such people maybe would be more likely to vote for you again. And, obviously you don't want to do that in a like completely corrupt way, but it struck me more than once that, the old days of like Tammany Hall machine politics were not, they had a lot of differences with the way machine politics is conducted now. In that, insofar as there was corruption in the Tammany Hall days, people tried to spread it out over a much larger number of people. And so I'm wondering if in your interaction with sort of like the Democratic machine in Philly and in the state, if you've had any sort of purchase with that kind of argument, to be that like, hey, like Comcast is not the only voter in the state. Like there are other people who also have the franchise, and we should try to cater to their needs in a way to sort of establish ourselves, and bring in the votes, so to speak. Is that resonating at all, do you think?
Yes. So it is resonating, and the reason it's resonating is actually because the machine is not a kind of consolidated entity in Philadelphia. And I do think of Philadelphia as one of the last big city machines, or just that is, fairly intact and can field a slate of candidates and get those candidates to win, and then guarantee jobs and elections for, judges are elected in Pennsylvania, we should remember. And so a lot of what the party does is get judges elected, and it doesn't win every time. But it has a fairly serious capacity to do it. It's declining, but it is nonetheless to be reckoned with. And so, but it ultimately is just negotiating against many different regional machines. So there's like a Northwest black machine, which is itself has a few components, but just like, there's like a South Philly building trades machine. There's like there's a Northeast building trades machine. There's like all these different entities, and they're always angling for things at any given point. And so right now, the party itself, the official Democratic Party, in many ways is supporting the incumbent state senator, but we have what is unusual, I think, for like a left-wing candidate is we've received the support of two major building trades unions, and that's Local 98, the electrical workers, and the Laborers District Council, which is the only majority black section of the construction unions. And so, and then we have ward leaders who are supporting us. We have some support in Southwest Philly and in some of the black sections of the district. So we've kind of made inroads, I guess I would say. And part of that is on this appeal. Exactly. It's like it turns out, I have a labor background. I'm a labor candidate. So I'm a solid vote on those issues. And or at least a person who will call you, and like before voting against you. And so that sort of that's like that's actually goes a long way. It doesn't mean that there isn't. I'm simplifying matters, but you're I guess stepping back for a bit. Yeah, you do want to point out when it seems like a machine candidate is largely corporate backed or is not really serving the largest number of constituents in their district, or you can make that case effectively, you can then win sections of the machine to your side. And so, I guess I feel like, even though I'm anti-corruption, I'm anti-machine in a kind of crude sense, like in broad ways, yeah, the machine, when you look more closely, there are common interests, there are things to be had. There are places to meet people, and especially that ground is labor and organized labor. And I think that's where I'm most at home, I think, with the so-called machine.
So it's like in Terminator 2, where there are two different machines, but one wants to kill everyone and the other is Arnold Schwarzenegger and he's the union guy. That's the good machine. And sometimes no, but really, so you have actually, right, what I love about leftists generally is the integrated vision, which is we want to help people that are suffering, and that's an integrated thing. So we want them to have an education. We want them not to, be poisoned by asbestos or lead. We want them to have homes to live in. And then when you talk about employment and unions, you're talking about how do we balance, power as against the capitalist class. And so proposing support of unions and ending at-will employment, I think, is a major thing, because when you piece together these different kinds of policies, you can see that within capitalism, there's a way forward for your average person to survive and even thrive. So maybe speak a little bit to that. Was that part of how you were able to get some of the trades on your side because of how you are offering a platform and leadership that really does support kind of everyone?
Yeah, I think it has to do with two things. I think there's an ideological component, and there is just a component that is the power that we've built up over time. So ideologically, absolutely. I think there's no question that. I think there are things that happen, which is that I have a background in organizing with Unite Here, and Unite Here is one of the first unions to in fact, was our first endorsement. They endorsed us on the day we launched the campaign. And that's very unusual anyway for a union to go against an incumbent. But for Unite Here, basically $50 million in non-union hotels have been built with the state grant money that I've been talking about. And so they're like, well, we have no relationship with this state senator. He's been going against our members and the potential for growing our membership for the last 12 years. So this is existential for us. We need a change in this seat. And so having one of our own in this seat, someone who completely understands these issues is what we need. And you're viable, or, you have the capacity to win. So I think the fact that that vote of confidence from an actual, not just because I think you can be ideologically pro-union, but having a particular union in your corner that other people are cool with as well, means that then and then over time, if people start to see that your campaign is viable and you're winning people over, that's what matters. And then with Reclaim Philadelphia, we've gone up against particular union back candidates and won. But then people are like, oh, well, actually the candidate who's won is fine. Like they're not anti-labor, they're pro-labor. They're probably more pro-labor than some of the yuppie candidates that might otherwise be fielded against us. I think that's also, and so seeing that proof of concept, as it were, over time, they then they're ready to do it. And so I think, one of the most progressive council people in Philadelphia, Helen Gim, won in 2015 with partial support from the building trades. She received it again in 2019. So there's also a recognition of wanting to be allied with, it's not, I think with people who are basically solid labor people who can win, right? And I think that's essential. And then in this case, there's just been things that the incumbent has done that have not been salubrious for labor. So, for example, Hahnemann Hospital, which is a slightly more national story. It was serving a majority minority working class population in the district. It closed it was shut down because of a private equity titan. It ran it into the ground. And it was a huge scandal. And the state senate, it's in the state senator's district. 700 employees of AFSCME 1199C, who are the hospital maintenance staff in that building, were laid off. And the state senator never contacted the head of that union or members of that union until a few months ago when he was running for re-election. So that's not a way to endear yourself to a major, a union that has 13,000 members in the state, 1,000 members in the district, a largely black union that is also in the nursing homes right now, that has members dying. And if you're like, well, this state senator actually is not really around. I hate them. And so they're going to, that is motivating. Right. And then it's like, well, there's this other candidate who all these my other labor allies say is totally solid. And so it's not, this endorsement didn't come early. They actually endorsed us last week, but they now see that this is a serious campaign and they want to be with us and think it is important. And if you haven't had a relationship with the incumbent that you like before, it can be you can think, okay, I actually want to try something different here. So that's how I read it. So it's I think it's less the particulars of the platform, and more the kind of general sense of someone being a solid labor person.
You've got a number of other interesting proposals that I've been reading about. You've got something on tax reform, SEPTA, and you mentioned the Green New Deal also. But can you go into those in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, and a lot of these are not, I would say, the tax proposal is not specific to my campaign, but it is a proposal that there are two sides to it. So I would say that one, I think Pennsylvania is one of the taxes at a much lower rate than most of its neighbors, including Ohio, right? Comparable states, so not just sort of blue states, but just other states that are similar. And one of the reasons it doesn't is actually has like a flat tax, essentially, or a regressive tax in the state constitution, the uniformity clause, which prevents you from taxing different classes, at graduated rates. So, for example, you can't tax residential property at a different rate that you tax commercial property. So you have to tax Comcast and your average row home owner at the same rate, which is ridiculous. And so it's one of these things that a lot of people have wanted to repeal. But so one of our tax proposals is to create, or one of the things we've adopted is to create a tax. You can tax wages and interest at a different rate as taxing income from wealth. And so you would lower the state tax on late wages and interest and raise a tax on income from wealth. And that would actually lower taxes for most people and generate about $2.2 billion a year on this proposal. And it would be more equitable than the current tax system. The other side tax idea, and this also comes from the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center or Conversations, is regional tax sharing. So to fund SEPTA, which is a regional system, but is deeply underfunded and relies a lot on fares. I mean, the left has a lot of proposals for free fares, but we're not even close to that with SEPTA because it's like 50% funded by fares. So we're not even... And there's tolls and there are various ways that it faces fiscal shortfalls. So one idea is to reduce, there's a non-resident wage tax if you don't live in Philadelphia, but you work in the city, you pay a tax or commuter tax even. You could lower that but then because everyone relies on SEPTA, maybe raise taxes for a regional fund that would come from not just Philadelphia, but the region around Philadelphia. And then that might go to funding SEPTA. It's speculative, I would say, because it actually, I don't know how much this pencils out, but it is one way that you can do tax share. You can raise money for things like that are held in common. The arts are actually another thing that you could kind of fund through this system. So because people come into the city to go to the opera or to do things like that, and so it's just you can use regional taxes to fund the arts. And so those are two of the kind of tax side things. And then the Green New Deal proposal is a suite of proposals that include transit, expanding our transit system. There's the housing component, which we've already talked about, which is greening our housing, and then and moving off, a broader transition off of fossil fuels. But the kind of one of the main ideas that is, I think, maybe novel to our plan is a lot of the decarbonizing of infrastructure that we want to do, because we believe that just is a source of jobs, and it is something that's happening elsewhere. So getting natural gas out of buildings, which is so not just trying to develop alternative sources of energy, but getting our existing commercial real estate and housing stock not to rely on fossil fuels. Like that would start to affect the demand side for fossil fuels in a state that is the third largest extractor of new oil and gas after Canada. So these are big proposals, but we need. I think one of the things that animated it, and this was pre-COVID, and this was working with a lot of kind of bigger thinkers on the Green New Deal side, Daniel Aldana Cohen, who's a sociologist, Billy Fleming, who's a landscape architect. Who are two of the major authors of that green stimulus that's been circulating recently. The idea was like, we're going to hit a recession at some point, and we know what happened in 2009. We need shovel-ready projects so that we can direct stimulus money. States are important. We need those states to be directing those stimulus project funds to green projects and green remediation projects, cleaning up brownfield sites, whatever. We didn't expect that would happen this way. I mean, that this would be no one did, of course, but we were not coming into this. But it speaks to the fact that there was some foresight around this, and now and so, when you read things like that green stimulus plan that has been going around, it comes from the fact that people were thinking about this actually quite ahead of this particular crisis. But that's a lot of the thinking behind our Green New Deal plan is both that Pennsylvania is important. It is a fracking state. It is, but it is also, we also expected a crisis. And so we needed to plan ahead.
Yeah, for sure. This maybe is outside your wheelhouse, maybe more of a city council question, but who do I complain to get some street sweeping going on in Philly?
Street sweeping. This is, we were going to have it, actually. Mayor Kenny promised this year in his inaugural address that we were going to have street sweeping in Philadelphia, although that happens every so often. So Philly used to have street sweeping, and then it was ended in 2008. You actually will still see signs here and there that are like, move your car, like, because there's there's street cleaning or something like that. And it just has not existed for a while in any real way. It's the only major city that doesn't have it. It is a common feeling we should have it. And I mean, it needs funding. It needs a dedicated source of funding. And right now the city, what does it do? It abates property taxes for 10 years on any new construction or any building that has been repaired in some way. So like, it's like giving up money all over the place. But then, I think things like getting state funding, like more dedicated state funding, like through reforming our tax system, all of those would make it easier to get some street cleaning in the city. The city needs more funding. It's on ice though right now because of
what is the relationship between the state senator? Like, how would you talk to Helen and the others on the city council and work with them in terms of coordinating your political activities? That's something that it just occurred to me as you described this problem might be useful to do especially for leftists that have the kind of privilege to serve their constituents in overlapping ways. So how might that work? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so there's two sides to it. There's the direct constituent service side. So you work with your district council person or you work with city council people to get services to people in your district. And sometimes those services are best served through the city and sometimes they're served through the state. So actually there's like a home repair program that is pretty means tested and parsimonious and goes through the state, but nonetheless it's a state program. And so you would work with like your constituents, call various offices, the state senator or state representative works with their city council person, and you kind of negotiate how you help someone. That happens a lot. I think that's a lot of the work actually. And actually what's been the case for recently is the current state senator's office is not considered very diverse. And so it has been alleged, and we have not proven this, so it is alleged that he has never had a black staffer in his office for many years. And it's been said enough times to me that I feel comfortable repeating it, but it's not, we should be clear that it's not.
Right.
But it's so there, there's just a lot of people who feel left out of what's going on in this office. But the other thing is, so there's that side of it, but then there's also just like the policy side. I think there's you try to support what the city is doing at the state level. A lot of it is about preemption. So the state is always trying to preempt legislation that Philly passes, whether that's paid sick leave, whether that's it's actually, it makes it very difficult to raise the minimum wage in the city or to do kind of to do things in any particular way that would help Philadelphians. The domestic workers' rights bill, Fair Work Week, there are all these bills that are constantly threatened by the state. And so the state senator's job is to fight for them and to fight for Philadelphia in many ways. And so coordinating with city council or making sure that state funding is available for city council initiatives, that's what you do. And so working closely with city council people is essential. So that would be exciting. I mean, it's on the constituent side or on the legislative side. But
absolutely. I mean, because Philly's had a great, number of candidates who've been successful lately from the left in the city. So it's really, I think, a great opportunity to make inroads, right?
Yeah, I mean, like Larry Krasner, the district attorney, he's constantly being threatened by the state, including by Democrats, to be clear. Sure. Like Josh Shapiro, the attorney general, has tried to get some legislation preempting some of the gun, the way that this district attorney was dealing with gun possession cases, things like that. I mean, you need an advocate on the state level, and so that's what I would be one of them. Basically, I would be one of the leading ones.
I have just one more question for you. What would be your advice to anyone who is maybe where you were, a year ago or something, someone who's considering a run for public office of some sort? What are your sort of pro tips for, getting into the game?
Interesting question. I guess it would be interesting to ask me this question after June 2nd, but actually, because at the current moment, I guess since I do feel that we have run, you always have, regrets and qualms and stuff, but I do feel that we've run the campaign that we want to run. I would say start early. I mean, we started exploring in July and, but maybe I would start earlier, actually. I don't know if if we win, I would then say, no, we started right on time. It was great. But like, I didn't, it was fine, but you have to raise so much money, right? I think there's just no way around it. And I think there's like a certain charm to the ramshackle nature of grassroots fundraising, but it is grueling. You we've raised over $300,000, which is in partly, over 5,000 contributions, $58, the average contribution, all of that stuff. Like we've done it in a way that we are comfortable with. We haven't taken money from real estate developers, fossil fuel companies, pharmaceuticals, whatever. Not that we've been offered, to be clear, but it would be nice to reject it. But so that's just a big part of it. And knowing that you have building up that infrastructure, like an alternative fundraising infrastructure. Like we have that after several years of running candidates. People who have donated to other left-wing causes who are ready to support a state Senate candidate in this instance, and to call them, that's just a lot of the work. And so, building that over time and it may not, and knowing that you have that, I think is important. Because if you don't, you can't pay a staff, you can't run a field program, you just can't do the things that you want to do. And you want to pay people a living wage, and you want to pay health. We have health and we have a unionized staff, right? We have so that's a big part of it. And then, I would say that you have to like it. I like it, I guess. Like you have to try it out and know that you like it, because it takes, and I'm burnt out on certain days, and because we've been doing it for a month, a couple months longer than we expected because of the crisis. Right. They postponed the election date. And I'm doing it differently, but nonetheless, a lot of it is similar in the sense I'm on the phone all the time, and there's just so you have to like it, and you have to, and if you don't, it's not, don't do it. You have to actually like being out talking to tons of people constantly and shuttling between places relentlessly. And it's very draining, but I do like it. I do miss that part of it. Actually, I do miss that part, is we haven't been able to do it. So those are the things, but I would, and then ultimately having an infrastructure that is separate from your campaign infrastructure. So all of the candidates who have won in Philly have had a group of institutions. Reclaim Philadelphia, to some degree, there's the DSA and Lilac, the Working Families Party, progressive labor unions, knowing that you can call on that kind of those groups of people, and they represent constituencies and volunteers who will come out to support you. That's what you need to be able to call on that. You can't just build. I mean, some of that has been built through campaigning and through work. It's like, it's not one, you can't quite have one come before the other. But now that we have that, it just makes this so much more, and then the point is that you expand it. We've expanded it now with this campaign. And whether we win or lose, we have a different infrastructure than when we started. We had over 400, we had nearly 500 individual volunteers on the campaign.
It probably helps to have been involved in organizing for a long time and to have been interested in helping and serving the communities you're a part of, because then you build those relationships and have those institutional ins because of that service and because of that involvement. And so for those that are considering running, they might be those very people that have been involved already in various ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're the people who have worked in Reclaim Philadelphia, the members of Unite Here who have been hugely involved, and so because they also come back week after week. We had like a consistent, even in the depths of like the crisis first after it hit, and we weren't on the doors and we weren't doing, being on the phone initially felt like a real loss after knocking doors for so long, because you just feel it to be inferior. But we had 50 volunteers who would come back week after week who were committed to the campaign. And so that's just essential. It's essential to have that. And so the other thing is I don't know how much this has played into it, is actually being a magazine editor. I don't know that not everyone can just be a magazine editor, but it's helped with the policy side. I would say that like you actually have to, as a magazine editor, you're always like, you're dumb about most things, and you get essays written on topics that you don't know anything about or you couldn't possibly write yourself, but you have to become semi-expert in them and literate in them and ask lots of questions until you can speak about them confidently to your writer. And so that skill has actually been unexpectedly useful in just the like policy side of campaigning, being able to speak about a lot of different things, right, with some confidence or ability, and also to be like, actually, I don't know. Like when you really don't know the answer. So that was like, I don't know, that more than actually writing, more than being a journalist, being an editor has been more useful. And then, your writers, they're ready. If they liked your editing, they're ready to support you. We have a lot of my writers, are making calls for us right now. That's pretty cool. So.
That's awesome. Your campaign is working its butt off, and I know this in particular because somebody messaged me on Facebook like a week ago, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm already on board." No worries. But yeah, no, being a Nikil of all trades, as it were, doesn't hurt, right? Being humble and being being involved in understanding all the different things that affect people. That's pretty awesome. We're really, really glad to have you on and excited for your candidacy. How are you feeling right now as you're thrown this kind of curveball with the extended campaign and with being on the phones and all that, but how are you feeling kind of heading into June 2nd?
I mean, we feel good. You get into, we outlined a scenario that we were going into this campaign that was pessimistic, but that still provided a path to victory. And pessimistic in the sense of having no institutional support, virtually no labor support, having some progressive support, but basically relying on volunteers and, grassroots fundraising and all that stuff. And we had goals and plans and all of it. And we've exceeded those in the sense that we have we've built a pretty broad and diverse like labor, community, progressive environmental coalition that's pretty unique, I think, to our, but among left-wing candidates in Philly to like our campaign and like and certainly in this district. And we've made thousands of phone calls. We knocked lots of doors before this. We have people interviewing us on podcasts. It can't be. It's like, it's the dream. It's
gonna push you over the edge. You're gonna get the left anchor bump. Baby.
Farnese is not going on the podcast. I think it's just like we feel good, and then on the people are excited on the phones, and like we have a lot of support, and it's just there's a lot that is up in the air, and it's obviously we're running against a 12-year incumbent, and so you just never one is hard pressed to say, yeah, great, we're gonna win. Like, but we feel, and if there's this vote by mail option, how are people going to show up at the polls? Like, there's just all these unknowns, but we're planning for all of them. This is not our first election. It's maybe the biggest that many of us have done. But we've been able to run the campaign that we want to run and feel good about. So that feels good.
Awesome. Well, I know you have the Bernie Sanders endorsement, but even more important, you have the Left Anchor endorsement. Isn't that right, Ryan?
Yeah. We can, we'll break our 501c4 pledge, and discount all our dark money donors. But yeah, we definitely wish you the best of luck. I guess we should probably let you go. But Nikil Saval, the election, for those who maybe happen to live in the 1st District, the election is on June 2nd. If you haven't already sent in your mail-in ballot, make sure to tick that checkbox there. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Alexi. Thank you for having me. This was great. It was really great to talk about and to go deep about it, especially about policy and all that stuff. So thank you.
Absolutely. Come back on after you've won, my friend.
Thank you. I will be glad to.
Yeah, and thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.